My name is Derek, and I work at BBDO Toronto, and I am a creative in advertising. And today I'm going to talk about creativity and collaboration. And I basically have to be creative all the time for my job, and that would kind of make me seem like an expert. But I'm not actually really an expert. I kind of have no idea what I'm doing most of the time, but I definitely try really hard every day to be really creative. So creativity is contagious. Pass it on. And this is a thought that I wanted to kind of talk about first before I get into my talk. And that is that really cool creative ideas should be contagious, and you should be able to actually pass them on. And I'm not going to really give you any solutions today that are going to help you to necessarily get to the answer or give you like a recipe. I want to give you more some things to talk about and some context around being more creative. And obviously Albert Einstein said this with his crazy tongue out. I guess it's like a Miley Cyrus thing now, but so I'm going to talk about individual creativity, and I'm going to talk about collaborative creativity. And individual creativity will be the first part of my talk, and then I'll get into how that can kind of hit a limit, and you really have to be collaborative to have amazing ideas happen. So individual creativity, this is when you're going on like the philosopher's walk, and you're doing poetry, or you might be playing guitar by yourself, or painting, or kind of being in a capacity where you're just on your own. And there are inherent limits with this, but there's ways that you can help kind of come up with really cool ideas on your own. And I'm going to ask a really big question first, which is, where do ideas come from? And I have no idea where ideas come from, and I don't think anyone really knows where good ideas come from. So if that's why you came here, then you should probably leave now, because I don't have any answers for you. But I do have some ways in which we can look at kind of the environment and different ways that we can kind of make ideas happen. And so we're going to talk a bit first about the external. So the external is kind of looking at things around you and things that can inform you. So if you're looking at a painting or a book, or playing like musical instruments, or listening to like your favorite Bob Dylan album, these are all different things that are externally affecting you and helping you to come up with different ideas. And so I want to start this section with a bit of a quote from a man named Bruce Mao, who some of you may or may not know. He has a design studio in downtown Toronto, and he did all the indigo branding. So you see the indigo with the upside-down eye that's like an exclamation mark and all that stuff, and all the store design. He's a really brilliant creative mind. And he has this thing that's called the Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And this is a really cool thing for you to maybe to read after, but I've tried to really come back to this Incomplete Manifesto for Growth throughout my career, as I find that it's really interesting for me to look at and be inspired by. And one of his points is coffee breaks, cab rides, and green rooms. And what he means by this is that the areas that we normally come up with creative ideas, whether that's brainstorming in a boardroom or kind of in these segmented areas where we're supposed to come up with creative ideas, that's not usually the best place to come up with creative ideas. It's usually the places in between those places, right? It's what Dr. Seuss calls the waiting place. And he has this kind of thought that everyone here is waiting in this illustration. They're waiting for something else. And while they're in this waiting place, they're coming up with really cool ideas. It's from the book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, by Dr. Seuss. And this is a man named Hans Urst. I can't pronounce his last name. But he's an art historian, and he created what is essentially called the non-conference. And the non-conference is a conference where there's actually no speakers. There's just everything else that surrounds a conference. So it's pretty weird, but you've got like the badges, and you've got all the people coming in their flights, and you've got all the after parties and all this stuff, but there's actually no actual conference and speakers. And it's a pretty funny concept, but it actually, when you think about it, in all the conferences I've been to, I was at South by Southwest last year, and I found that although the talks were really inspiring, a lot of the real conversation and collaboration was happening outside of those talks and was happening in the lobby after, or in the after parties and that kind of thing. So he had a really, really successful conference this way. Another way that you can help solicit external is to actually write down all the thoughts and ideas that you have. And this is an image from my shower, and this is a product that I developed, and you can buy it on eBay. No, I'm just joking. I don't know. I found this last night on the internet, and I thought it was really funny. I don't really know how this would work. The paper would probably get all soggy and fall off. But yeah, this thought of no more, ideas go down the drain. And so you want to be writing down all of your ideas, or this is what I do at least, all the time, even if they're half ideas. And the purpose of these half ideas is more about documenting triggers for later. That's kind of what I do. And I write them down because when I see them written, either by pencil or in my iPhone or whatever, when I see them written, I'm more of a visual learner, so I need to see that actually written out for me to register that that's kind of that idea. And everyone has different learning styles, so maybe if you have like a cool idea, like a notepad in the shower idea, then you would say that out loud, and maybe you could be in the shower when you have that idea. Who knows? Another point of feedback here is that you should also take more showers, because that's like the area where you're supposed to come up with cool ideas, right? So we can do all kinds of different things to foster creativity. They're all kind of based around think outside the box and stay up late and get up early and do some of the things that I mentioned here. And I could probably talk for the full TED Talk about how to be more creative in your life that way. But I want to kind of shift the focus more from the external and the individual to more about internal and working with other people. So let's talk about the internal for a second. So when we go to internal and where do ideas come from, we think about the human brain. This is the whole center of what's happening in your body when you're coming up with ideas. And this is actually a painting by an artist named Laura Jacobson, and this is hanging in Stanford University in the Department for Neurological Research. And they have this whole wing that has this art installation area, and all of the art is inspired by MRI imaging and different images of the brain. And I thought this is a really cool piece because as an art director and working in advertising and creating things, this painting was kind of this meta thing where in order for her to get inspired to create art or MRI art, she would have had to have that kind of that brain spark and have certain neurons firing so that she could actually come up with an idea to create something like this. So it's pretty cool. And so what better way to analyze the brain than freestyle rap, right? So there was this study done at the National Institute of Health on freestyle rap, and they basically wanted to look at freestyle rap as a way that is just this kind of flow state that people talk about when they're being really creative, and that's where you're just flowing and you're coming up with ideas, and you're not necessarily sitting there and evaluating if your ideas are good or if they're bad or that kind of thing. And they did it through fMRI. And fMRI is really cool because it analyzes the active parts of your brain while you're doing a particular task. So in this case, they put freestyle rappers into the MRI machine and hooked them up and got them to be like, busting out raps, laying vertically in this like really uncomfortable environment. So the test scores were probably a little bit lower because they're like way out of place there. But they measured their brains when they were freestyle rapping, and then they measured their brains when they were reciting a rap that they had known for a long time or that they were just reciting from memory. What was really cool was the parts of the brain that were lit up during the improvisation were the opposite parts of the brain that were lit up when they were doing the rehearsed performance. And what this shows to me, and I kind of think about, I'm not very good at freestyle rapping, but I do consider that I'm fairly okay at coming up with creative ideas because I haven't been fired yet. So what this kind of shows me is that when the improvisational parts of the brain are being active and you're in one of those kind of brainstorming sessions, you're coming up with new ideas, the part of your brain that is looking at your performance and are you doing the right job and if you're making mistakes, etc., that part actually physically shuts down in the brain. Okay? And so it's really important when you're coming up with creative ideas that you remember this. And you remember that if you start being critical of your ideas as you're coming up with them, and we all do this, or if you're in a group setting and you're coming up with ideas and someone else is like, well, that's a stupid idea. It's like, shut up. Because what that's doing is it's turning off the part of your brain that's supposed to be creative. So it's really important to focus on, when you're in that flow state, to really be coming up with creative ideas and not to be too hung up on whether or not they're good or not. You just have to keep, coming up with cool ideas. You can be critical later. You can look at your ideas the next day, which we always do in advertising after a night of a few drinks. And we look at the ideas the next day, and 95% of them are crap. And that's okay, because we just go back and we do it again. So, but the analytical part happens later. So I'm going to talk about collaborative creativity now in this kind of last half. And it's fundamentally more powerful, right? There's limits that you can hit when you're just working on your own versus when you're working with others. And there's sometimes are problems when you work with others. We've all been collaborating with other people where we find that we butt heads or egos get in the way, and you don't really have that kind of free-flowing of ideas that you might have just with your own thoughts. So there's the notion of two heads are better than one, right? And we all know this from Sesame Street and Jim Henson, but we all know this as kind of this saying that we all say, yeah, two heads are better than one. And I find that most of the time, two heads can be not so great because you end up kind of hitting these walls with people, and unless you have a really cool partnership with someone where you can, in advertising we have the art director and the copywriter, and typically it's a really good system for coming up with ideas because there's no ego in the way between us two. It's just coming up with ideas, prototyping, talking, and nothing's bad, nothing's really good, and then you can look at it later. And so, are two heads better than one? Well, in idea, yes. In practice, not so much. So let's kind of look at some ways that maybe we can make that process a little bit better. An interesting point is that you already have two heads in your own head. Okay? And so you're like, wait, what does it even mean? It's like, yeah, tweet that, cool, next slide, whatever. Don't think about it. Don't think about it. Hashtag Trent, what's the hashtag? Hashtag TEDxTrentUniversity. TEDxTrent, okay, right. TEDxTrent? Okay. So I'm going to run a small experiment right now where I want you all to close your eyes. And I want you to close your eyes for a full 30 seconds. And when I say open your eyes again, I want you to open your eyes, and we'll kind of continue on the presentation. But during these 30 seconds, I want you to think of absolutely nothing. I want you to think of nothing. And if anyone here is practicing meditation, this should be probably a little bit easier for you. But for those that don't do meditation, this is probably going to be a little bit harder. So I'm going to stop talking and really just try and think of nothing for 30 seconds. That was a long 15 seconds. Okay, so most of you were probably thinking of different things, and you weren't actually thinking of nothing. You were thinking of maybe the word nothing, or you were thinking of blackness, or you were thinking of maybe like the night sky, or different things that will help you get to nothing. Maybe you're counting down, or you're counting up, or something. And what ends up happening is you have this conversation with yourself in your head, right? You're going like, think of nothing. Wait, I'm not thinking of nothing because I'm saying something. No, okay, quiet, shut up, okay. Think of nothing. And so it's like, okay, are you crazy? Because you're talking to yourself, right? So what that really shows is that the two halves of the brain are communicating with each other and actually have the potential to collaborate internally. I'm going to talk about epilepsy for a second here because I'm actually running a little short on time. Epilepsy is the most common serious brain disorder worldwide. It has no age, racial, social class, national, or geographical boundaries. And I'm going to tie this into what I just said before. With extreme cases of epilepsy, it can cause the body to go into a seizure that is so bad that the body will actually shut down and the person is killed, right? So in extreme forms of epilepsy, it's terrible. And so there was an experiment that was done in the 1940s where they took epileptic patients and they found what is the corpus callosum in between each half of the brain, which is the kind of connective tissue that allows each side of the brain to talk to the other side. This is the part where when you were thinking of nothing, he was kind of going back and forth, back and forth. And what they found was if they cut the corpus callosum, that it would actually make the patients that had epilepsy be totally cured. And this is this amazing discovery. And what was crazy about this is that basically they were unable to have a communication between each half of the brain after that. And they did this with a number of experiments. They had them put their hand over their eye like this and point at a shape on the wall, and then then the doctors would have the patients switch and do it again, and then they would say, point at the thing that you just pointed at. And they would have no idea what they just pointed at. They wouldn't understand which one did I point at, and that's because the brain wasn't communicating anymore because that corpus callosum was severed. They did another experiment where they had them actually now use touch, and they had them reach out behind this kind of this curtain or whatever, and reach out and feel things, basic objects. In here we have keys and rings and screwdrivers and stuff, and they would have them feel it and go, okay, yeah, I feel that. And they'd say, okay, now reach in your other hand and pick out the thing that you just felt. And they'd reach in with their other hand and be like, I have no idea what I was just feeling. And so this really illustrates that the brain is these two independent brains, or these two heads within your head, and they actually are able to have this talking back and forth, right? And so if you can imagine for a minute that with our limited human brains that have these two halves, if you can imagine that there could be an intellect out there that could have more than just these two halves. If you could imagine, I'm not talking about aliens and craziness, I'm just saying, if you could have more than two halves of the brain, maybe you have 4 components to the brain, you could start to have multiple conversations within that intellect. And that would be a pretty amazing kind of intellect to have, right? This kind of multiple conversation. Unless, of course, this amazing intellect started to behave like a committee, and then they wouldn't be able to come to a decision because they would just be like, no, you do it. No, what about you? No, okay, da, da, da. And then you could take your sword and you could destroy this crazy being. So okay, now we're on the edge of the talk. So what's really cool is that we don't have that kind of intellect happening necessarily in a single being, but we do have that intellect and the power of being collaborative with other people. And you have experiences with other people where you've looked at them and you're communicating with them and you're brainstorming, and there isn't that wall in between, and you can really come up with amazing ideas together. And it is like you're this multi-lobed kind of multi-dimensional being, and you can understand pretty complex problems and come up with some pretty cool solutions. And as humans, we are limited to kind of what we can understand just on our own. We can understand 2D pretty well. We can understand 3D pretty well. We have 3D objects. 4D starts to get a little crazy. You start talking about space and time. That's more like, okay, that's like crazy math and Einstein and like Stephen Hawking and all that physics stuff. So, if we can collaborate, then we can really get to some cool solutions for some of the world's biggest problems. And there's pros and cons to collaborating, right? As we talked about, there's ego, and there's the fear of being wrong, and all this kind of thing. But the pros really outweigh the cons here. And if you can get yourself to a really safe place with people in your organization or wherever you go back to work on Monday, et cetera, you can really start to harness the power of collaboration within your own groups and with your own teams that have nothing to do with advertising and nothing to do with the things that are creative, right? And a really important part that I need to impart on you is that you can't just go back to your teams and think about this on your own. You have to go back to your teams and the people in your life, and you have to think about this as generative thinking. So you have to go back and you actually have to talk about these ideas with the person that you're trying to be collaborative with, or with the team that you're being collaborative with. Otherwise, you'll be sitting at the table, and you'll be thinking like this, and the other person will still be stuck in, brick wall mode, and you won't be able to have this ongoing dialogue. So you really have to, be a leader when you go back to whatever you're doing, and you have to really foster and create this, amazing, safe place for amazing ideas to happen. And so I'm going to leave you with just a little video, just to take it back to Sesame Street. And this will kind of wrap up the whole talk that I'm giving today. And I want you to look at it with the context and the lens of the stuff that we've been talking about today, about safe place and having fun and being collaborative. And look at it with that lens. Although it's very simple and almost juvenile, it does have a really strong message in it.
Two heads are better than one. That's a saying that is oh so true. Two heads are better than one.
They're me, they're you.
That's two, and between the two of you, you can solve any problem that comes up.
No.
It's much better to be two.
Yeah, you gonna give me the word.
'Cause what you don't know or can't figure out, you can try to.
Try!
Two heads are better than one. The more, the merrier, you bet.
You bet!
Two heads are better than one. You could use all the help you can get. And when all's said and done, this is where it's at. What I'm simply saying is that
What?
two heads are better than one. So just put your heads together. Yes, put your heads together. Quick, put your heads together and have fun. Have fun.
Fun!
So yeah, have fun. Collaborate. Thanks. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Eric.